It's hard to believe, but it was roughly just 1 year ago when Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker heard a knock on the door of his synagogue, the synagogue being in Colleyville, Texas. Knowing that it was cold outside, Rabbi Citron Walker opened the door and he encountered a shivering man and he offered the gentleman a cup of tea. And for those that remember the story, the scene quickly turned because once the rabbi began services, the rabbi heard the click of a gun. Moments later, it turned terribly dangerous, and for the next 11 hours, the rabbi and a few of his congregants would be held hostage by that then stranger. Fast forward into the day, as brilliant as the rabbi is loving, he managed to distract the gunman, giving the congregants and himself time to run away unharmed. Unharmed, but not untraumatized. And I say shockingly, but knowing this rabbi, not well, not one-on-one, but learning more and more about him, maybe I'm not surprised. When Rabbi Walker was asked a year later, reflecting about his initial actions on that fateful morning, this is how he responds. We can't live in fear. In fact, the rabbi said he'd give a stranger tea again. Now, this sermon isn't about security measures, of which we pray in an incredibly secure sanctuary and synagogue, thanks to Mike De La Portis and his security team. This sermon is about fear. If I ever have a chance to speak with Rabbi Walker, I might debate him about this idea of not living in fear. Because like many of you, I know many people who are alive and fearful. Those who are afraid of the future, those who are fearful about taking the next step in their journey, fearful about what exists outside their doors, afraid to move forward because the unknown itself is too dark to comprehend. And even if the known is scary, the unknown, well, that might be worse. So we can certainly live in fear. People do it all the time, but living, actual living and thriving and growing despite being afraid, that's what I think takes real spiritual work. Look at the Parsha this morning. God speaks with Moses and tells Moses exactly what Moses should relay to the Israelite people. This is what God says. Say this, Moses. This is the God that's going to lead you out of bondage. Freedom is here. It's in your hands. But the Torah reads, when Moses said these words to the Israelite people, they wouldn't listen to Moses. Their spirits crushed by cruel bondage. In Hebrew, mikotzer ruach. Now we've all heard this term ruach. Usually we say the word ruach when we talk about wind or spirit, but ruach is also another translation of the word soul. Through generations of endured slavery and torture, our ancestors' souls were beaten down, and they lived every single day in fear. And to imagine anything else, how could they? Because their kind of fear, that was predictable. Why would they introduce anything else? Nachmanides, the Torah commentator, explains that this idea of a crushed spirit, this was the fear that one day Pharaoh would eventually put them to death. But the Egyptian guards were smart. They would hurry the Hebrews through their tasks. Hurry, 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 so there wouldn't be any time to think about, oh, what if something looked different? There wouldn't be any time to hear or consider a different way of life. Living in fear is being unable to hear or see or sense a glimpse of the freedom that they might attain even when it comes directly from the mouth of a prophet. And so there's no easy answer. Think of the story. It took Moses and Aaron, sometimes Miriam, 10 plagues to convince both the Egyptians and Hebrews that living with crushed spirits is not really living at all. And we know that not everyone is convinced at the end of the story. But I think maybe perhaps we're being too harsh on our ancestors and maybe even too harsh with ourselves. Because remember the famous words of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. The whole world is a very narrow bridge, and the most important thing is to not be afraid. But I've since learned that what we attribute to Rabbi Nachman, those words, it's actually an adaptation of his original words. So listen closely. This is what Rabbi Nachman actually said. The whole world is a very narrow bridge, and the most important thing is to not cause oneself to be afraid. Meaning we will most likely be afraid. But we're not meant to cause ourselves unwarranted fear. Rabbi Mark Margolis explains, for Rabbi Nachman, courage is not about denying or repressing fear. Rather, the fundamental principle of courage is choosing not to frighten ourselves beyond the fear we already experience. Fear is unavoidable, perhaps even required, he says. But courage involves moving forward despite our fear. And I'll add, living, truly living, involves moving forward with our fear despite our fear. I once read a story from Rabbi Naomi Levy, and she shares the story of her daughter Noah as a young child with physical disabilities. And she said when Noah was little, all she wanted was a rock climbing birthday party. And as a mom, Rabbi Levy was so nervous and so afraid, because you can imagine the questions going through her mind. What if the kids make fun of her? What if the other kids surpass her? But as young kids have the power to do, Noah wore her mother down, and her mother threw that rock climbing party. And even though Rabbi Levy was agonizing about her decision every single day until she arrived to the place, on the day of the party, she looked up and realized that Noah was climbing. And there was another kid there at the birthday party, a kid without any disabilities. She describes him with strong muscles. But this little boy, he was scared, and he stood frozen in place. And what Rabbi Levy learned in that moment is that if you want to rise up, don't fear the bumps. But I might amend her text to read, don't let your fear of the bumps hinder your will to rise. Rabbi Levy writes, turn every stone into a step. The challenge in life is as simple as this. Do I stare at the wall or do I climb? Rav Kook expresses it the following way. Excessive fear takes away the radiance of a person's life force. The real evil lurking in the shadows, it's not the monster we conjure up at night, but the real evil is allowing uncertainty to put brakes on the life, begging us to move forward. Now, some of you may think, wow, she's a really brave rabbi. But for those who know me, you know, I look for exits wherever I go. Sanctuaries, movie theaters, restaurants. I grip my children's hands when we cross the street, and they groan in pure embarrassment, telling me every single time, we know where our house is, we're good. I try to be vigilant about safety, the safety of this community, my family, myself, but I take this lesson to heart Because for all of the I can'ts, for all of the I won'ts, I'm too afraid of the mights and the maybes and the what ifs. And I'm sure throughout our minds, you are cycling those same what ifs and maybes and mights. I think that's the excessive fear that's taking away the radiance of our souls. And so that's why I'm in awe of Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker. Because a year later, he isn't shutting his doors, and we would understand if he wanted to. But a year later, instead, he decided to stand before a congregation and offer a prayer for peace. This is his prayer. In a world that's broken and shattered, plagued by indifference, falsehood, and corruption, we feel the uncertainty, we feel the pain, and we are not helpless. God, we pray for peace, for wholeness and healing, for safety when violence touches us all. But God, we pray for peace, for justice and compassion, for acceptance in the face of hatred. We will not be held hostage to hopelessness. We pray for peace. We struggle for peace. We bring peace. We will be whole. God, help us be whole as we pray for peace. This is a man, a rabbi, a husband, a father. Like I said, we could easily understand if he decided to stop preaching or stop praying. Yet despite his fear, Rabbi Citron Walker teaches all of us how to live with grace and courage and with the fire to do more. I think it can be scary to sit in the dark, but let it not be our fear that stops us from turning on the light. As God says to Joshua as he leads the Israelites into the promised land, may we learn to journey forward. And as we live our one wondrous life, let's not let fear get in the way. Instead, chazak ve'amatz. Be strong. Take courage. Shabbat shalom.